The night was one of those nights when the sky seemed determined to weep out all its sorrow. Dark clouds gathered above the bustling city, rolling together like angry waves in the heavens. Lightning cracked through the sky, illuminating the streets below for brief, blinding moments, and then came the thunder, loud, growling, as though the heavens themselves were roaring in pain. The rain didn't fall gently. No, it attacked. Sheets of water came pouring down mercilessly, flooding the roads, drumming against rooftops, and striking the ground so hard that people ran for cover, clutching their umbrellas that struggled to stay open in the violent wind. Shopkeepers rushed to pull down their shutters. Street vendors covered their carts with plastic sheets, and pedestrians hurried into whatever shelter they could find, desperate to escape the storm. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, there was a sight that made the heart ache. Underneath the dim, flickering glow of a tired old street lamp stood a small figure, a boy, no more than 10 years old. He was soaked from head to toe, his hair plastered to his forehead, his tiny body shivering from the cold that pierced through his thin, torn shirt. His trousers, too short for his legs, clung tightly to him, weighed down by the water. His shoes, if one could even call them that, were nothing more than broken scraps of leather, one sole missing completely, the other hanging loosely, unable to shield his feet from freezing puddles forming around him. But it wasn't his clothes or his shivering body that caught the eye first. It was what he carried in his arms, against his fragile chest, wrapped in what once might have been warm blankets, but were now nothing more than wet, heavy rags, lay 2 tiny babies. Twins. Their faces were pale, their lips trembling as they whimpered softly, their cries weak and fragile against the raging storm. The boy clutched them desperately, trying to shield their tiny heads from the rain with his own small body. He shifted from side to side, trying to find shelter under the weak shadow of the street lamp, but the storm showed no mercy. The boy didn't shout. He didn't scream for help. He simply stood there, his wide brown eyes searching every passerby with a silent plea that screamed louder than any words could. Please, someone help us. People passed by. Some slowed down for a second, looked at him, then shook their heads and hurried off. Others didn't bother to look at all. To them, he was invisible, a common sight on the streets. A beggar, a street child, one of the thousands they had grown used to ignoring. A man walked by, pulling his coat tighter around himself. These street kids, he muttered, always out here, even in storms. Their parents should take care of them. But no one asked if the boy even had parents. A woman in a bright raincoat stopped for a moment, frowning. She opened her purse and dropped a single coin near his feet before rushing away, her heels clicking loudly on the wet pavement. The boy looked at the coin, then at the babies in his arms. His lips trembled. What could a single coin do? Could it buy food? Milk? A warm blanket? No. The coin seemed almost like an insult, a reminder of how little the world cared. Another person, holding a large umbrella, stopped for a moment and sighed. Poor child, they said, almost with pity, before walking away again, unwilling to let the storm drench them. The boy's knees were weak. His arms ached from holding the babies for so long. He hadn't eaten since morning, but he didn't care about his hunger. He cared about them. His sisters, his precious little twins who had no one else but him. He rocked them gently, whispering softly through his chattering teeth, "Don't cry, Aisha. Don't cry, Alina. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you. Just hold on. Please, just hold on." The rain poured harder, soaking him completely. His lips turned blue, his body shivered uncontrollably, but he refused to let go. His tiny arms formed a shield, a wall of love stronger than his weakness. And then fate intervened. At the end of the street, the sound of a luxury car's tires slicing through the water broke the monotony of the storm. Headlights cut through the rain like blades of light, growing closer and brighter until finally, the car slowed near the street lamp. It was a sleek black vehicle, shining even under the storm, the kind of car only the richest in the city could afford. The boy froze. Cars like that never stopped for people like him. They belonged to another world, a world of riches, chandeliers, and silk, where people like him didn't even exist. He lowered his gaze, clutching the babies tighter, ready for the car to drive past like all the others. But then the car stopped. The tinted window rolled down slowly, revealing a woman's face. Even in the dim light, her presence radiated power and elegance. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored outfit, diamonds glittering in her ears, her makeup flawless despite the storm. Her eyes, sharp and commanding, scanned the street until they landed on the boy. Time seemed to stop. For a brief moment, the woman's face softened. She saw the boy's trembling figure, the twins crying helplessly in his arms, the way he stood there silently begging with his eyes. Something stirred in her heart, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Compassion, pain, an ache she couldn't name. This woman was Madame Zara, one of the wealthiest women in the city. People knew her as powerful, untouchable, a lady whose name was whispered with respect and sometimes fear. She was a kind of woman who had everything money could buy: mansions, servants, cars, jewelry. But behind her cold, polished image, there was an emptiness, a quiet loneliness she never spoke of. And now, in the middle of a stormy night, her gaze locked with the eyes of a poor boy holding two fragile lives in his arms. The rain kept pouring. The city kept rushing. But in that moment, under the flickering light of the street lamp, something powerful happened. Two worlds, one of wealth and one of despair, collided. The boy's lips trembled. He wanted to speak, to beg, to cry out, but no words came. He only clutched the babies tighter, his eyes silently pleading, "Don't leave us too." And Madame Zara, her hand tightened on the car door. For the first time in a long time, she didn't think about society, appearances, or wealth. She thought only of those children, standing in the rain, waiting for someone to see them. Slowly, she opened the car door. The sound of her expensive heels splashing in the puddles cut through the storm. Gasps rose from the few people watching, shocked to see a woman of her status stepping out into the rain. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. Was she really walking toward him? And then, in a voice firm yet strangely gentle, Madame Zara asked, "Boy, what are you doing here in the rain with those babies?" Her question was simple, but for the boy it was everything. For the first time in months, someone had noticed. Someone cared enough to ask. And that was the beginning of a story neither of them would ever forget. The rain still poured, drenching the streets, but for the boy standing under the street lamp, the world suddenly seemed to pause. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A rich lady, one who looked like she belonged to a world of chandeliers and golden halls, was standing in the storm, looking directly at him. Her diamond earrings sparkled every time the lightning lit up the sky. Her perfume lingered faintly even in the rain, an aroma of wealth and refinement. But it wasn't her jewels or clothes that caught the boy's attention. It was her eyes. Sharp, yet not cruel. Stern, but not cold. Eyes that, for the first time in months, saw him. "Boy, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but carrying a hint of something else, a softness, a tremor of concern. The boy swallowed hard. His lips were trembling from both the cold and the fear. He had grown used to people ignoring him, sometimes even chasing him away like a stray dog. But no one ever asked him why he was out there. No one wanted to know his story. "Please, ma'am." His voice cracked, barely louder than the rain. "My sisters, they're hungry. I have no food, no home. Please help us." The twins stirred in his arms, their weak cries barely audible over the storm. Their small fists clenched as if even they were fighting to survive. The boy adjusted his grip on them, terrified they might slip from his numb, tired arms. His heart ached with guilt. He couldn't remember the last time he had given them proper food. He himself hadn't eaten in 2 days. But that didn't matter. What mattered were the babies. Always the babies. The woman, Madame Zara, looked at him longer, her perfectly made-up face betraying no emotion. To the passers-by watching from under umbrellas, it might have seemed like she was just curious. But deep inside, Zara felt something shifting. She had always been a woman of control. Nothing surprised her, nothing shook her. She had seen the darkest faces of greed and betrayal in the business world. Yet here she was, unable to look away from a shivering boy clutching 2 fragile lives. For the first time in years, her heart trembled. The boy saw her hesitation, and quickly lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered, thinking she was about to leave. "I didn't mean to bother you. I'll move away." He turned slightly, trying to shield the twins from her view. He had learned long ago that rich people didn't like beggars near them. They saw them as dirt, something to be avoided, never touched. But Zara did something no one expected. She stepped closer. Her expensive heels splashed in the puddles as she walked right up to him. The boy froze, unsure whether to run or stay. He couldn't run far anyway. His legs were weak, and the babies were too heavy. "Wait," Zara said firmly. The boy lifted his eyes again, his lashes heavy with rain. She was closer now, close enough for him to see the tiny droplets sliding down her flawless face, smudging her mascara ever so slightly. "Where are your parents?" she asked. His chest tightened. His lips quivered. "Gone," he whispered. "They died months ago." The words came out broken, but they carried the weight of his young heart. The storm around them seemed to grow silent in that instant, as though nature itself was pausing to listen. Zara's throat tightened. She tried to swallow, but found it difficult. She had lost people, too. Her parents long ago, and then, the cruelest wound of all, she had lost a chance to be a mother. Doctors had told her she could never have children. She buried that grief under her empire of wealth and power. But tonight, in front of this boy and his sisters, that buried ache rose to the surface. Your sisters?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Are they—" "They're hungry," the boy interrupted, clutching them tighter. His voice cracked like glass. "I've tried to feed them. I beg every day. Sometimes kind people give me a little bread. Sometimes milk. But most just walk away. Please, ma'am, I don't want money for me. Just for them. Please save them." Tears blurred Zara's vision. She hadn't cried in years, not since her own dreams of motherhood had died. But tonight, the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside her. She quickly pulled off the expensive cashmere shawl draped around her shoulders and wrapped it carefully around the babies. The boy gasped. No one had ever given them warmth like that. "Get inside my car," Zara said suddenly, her tone firm, leaving no room for argument. The boy's eyes widened in shock. What? "No, ma'am. I can't. Your car is too clean. I'll make it dirty. And His voice trailed off. He wanted to say, "I don't belong in places like that." But Zara's expression softened in a way that surprised even her servants watching from the car. She bent down slightly, her diamond earrings swaying as she leaned closer to the boy. "Child," she said in a voice both powerful and gentle, "rain washes away dirt, but kindness washes away pain. Get in." Her words were like a warm fire against the boy's frozen soul. No one had ever spoken to him that way before. His body trembled, not from the cold this time, but from disbelief. Could this really be happening? He looked at her again, then at the car waiting behind her, its doors open, warm light spilling out like a promise. For a long moment, he hesitated. All his life, people had hurt him, abandoned him, ignored him. Trusting someone felt dangerous. But then he looked at his sisters, little Aisha and Alina, whimpering in his arms, their faces pale with hunger and exhaustion. He couldn't let pride or fear stop him now. Slowly, carefully, he stepped forward. Zara reached out, not to grab him, but to steady him as he climbed into the car. The soft leather seats seemed unreal beneath his tired body. He had slept on pavements, under bridges, in empty alleys, but never on something so comfortable. The twins immediately stopped crying, their tiny faces relaxing as the warmth of the car enveloped them. Zara climbed in after him, closing the door. For a moment, silence filled the car, broken only by the steady hum of the rain outside. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He looked at Zara nervously. "Why? Why are you helping us, ma'am? People usually, they don't." Zara stared at him, her own heart racing. Why was she helping? Why had she stepped out of the safety of her wealth, her image, her carefully built walls? She didn't know. Or maybe, deep down, she did. "Because," she said quietly, her voice breaking, "someone should have helped you long ago." The boy's lips parted in surprise. For the first time in months, his eyes lit up, not with hope fully, not yet, but with a fragile spark of it. And so, on that stormy night, under the roar of thunder and the mercy of a stranger's heart, a bridge was built between a boy with nothing but courage and love for his sisters and a woman with everything money could buy, but an emptiness no riches could fill. Neither of them knew it yet, but this encounter was about to change their lives forever. The car glided smoothly through the rain-soaked streets, its powerful engine humming like a gentle lullaby compared to the storm raging outside. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely different. The world outside was chaos, thunder, lightning, rushing footsteps, but within the warmth of Madame Zara's luxury car, there was silence, heavy and fragile. The boy sat nervously on the edge of the seat, still clutching the twin babies tightly against his chest. Though the soft leather seemed like heaven compared to the cold, wet pavement he was used to, he couldn't relax. His shoulders remained stiff, his small hands trembling as they held on to the only family he had left. The twins, however, seemed to sense the difference. The warmth of the car wrapped around them like a hug they hadn't felt in months. Their weak cries had turned into soft whimpers, and soon their eyes fluttered shut, drifting into a fragile sleep. The boy adjusted the shawl Zara had wrapped around them, tucking it carefully to ensure they stayed warm. Madame Zara watched quietly, her sharp eyes studying every movement. For someone so young, he carried himself with responsibility far beyond his years. His arms, thin and weak, still formed a shield of protection around his sisters. His eyes, tired and heavy, still remained alert, as though afraid someone might take the babies away from him. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a firmness that demanded honesty. "What's your name, child?" The boy hesitated. His lips trembled before he whispered, "Armin." "And the babies?" she asked, her gaze shifting to the tiny girls nestled in his arms. He looked down at them, his eyes softening. "Aisha and Alina. They're my sisters." His voice cracked slightly, but he smiled, a small, tired smile filled with love. Zara leaned back, repeating the names in her mind. Armin, Aisha, Alina. The names sounded so innocent, so pure, yet their reality was anything but. After a long pause, she asked a question that had been weighing on her since the moment she saw him under the street lamp. "Where are your parents?" Armin's small body stiffened. His grip on the babies tightened. His eyes dropped to the floor of the car, staring blankly at the expensive carpet. For a long moment, he didn't answer. His lips quivered as though the words themselves were too heavy to carry. "They're gone," he whispered finally, his voice so soft that Zara almost missed it. Her heart clenched. She had expected hardship, perhaps neglect, but the finality of that single word cut deep. "Gone," she repeated gently. Armin nodded, his eyes glistening with tears he fought to hold back. 6 months ago, there was an accident. A truck, it hit their cart. My father and mother, they both died, just like that. His voice cracked, breaking into sobs. He buried his face against the top of one baby's head, trying not to cry too loudly, as if afraid his sisters would wake. Zara felt her throat tighten. For a moment, she saw herself in him, not as a child, but as someone who knew loss all too well. She remembered the day her own world had shattered, when doctors told her she could never carry a child. It wasn't death, but it was a loss she carried every day. And now, looking at this boy, she realized he carried a different kind of pain, but with the same crushing weight. "How have you survived since then?" she asked softly. Armin lifted his head, wiping his tears quickly with the back of his hand. I tried to be strong," he said, his voice trembling but determined. "I couldn't let Aisha and Alina be taken away from me. They're all I have. At first, I went to my uncle. He said he couldn't take care of us. He already has too many mouths to feed. Then I went to neighbors. They told me to leave. No one wanted us. No one wanted me." The bitterness in his tone made Zara's chest ache. A child shouldn't know such rejection. "So, I begged," he continued, lowering his eyes in shame. "I stood on the streets with them in my arms. Sometimes people gave us food. Sometimes milk. Most of the time, nothing. But I didn't care if I ate or not. I just needed them to survive. He kissed the top of one twin's forehead gently. They're still so little. They don't understand. They don't know our parents are gone. I don't want them to ever feel the pain I feel. I want to protect them even if I have nothing. His words struck her like lightning. Zara blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. She had seen countless men in business brag about power, wealth, and loyalty, but none of them carried even a fraction of the courage this boy had. 10 years old, starving, homeless, yet refusing to abandon his sisters. Her voice trembled when she asked, "Did you ever think to go to an orphanage?" Armin stiffened again. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw a flash of anger in his young eyes. "Yes, I went once. They said they would take us in, but they also said they would separate us. They would send me one place, and my sisters another. They are too small, they said. They need special care. But I couldn't let that happen." His small fist clenched. "We've already lost Mama and Papa. If we lose each other too, what's left? Who will they have? Who will I have?" His voice cracked at the end, and this time Zara couldn't stop the tear that rolled down her cheek. She turned her face slightly, not wanting him to see, but it was too late. He noticed. "You're crying?" he asked softly, surprised. Zara inhaled sharply, quickly wiping the tear away. She wasn't used to showing weakness. She was Madame Zara, known in society as unshakable, untouchable, always in control. But this boy, with his raw truth and unbreakable love, had reached past all her walls. "Yes," she admitted quietly, "because your story, it hurts. It hurts more than you know." The boy blinked, unsure how to respond. No rich person had ever admitted such a thing to him. For the first time, he felt that maybe, just maybe, this woman wasn't like the others. For a long moment, silence filled the car again. But this time, it wasn't heavy with fear. It was heavy with truth. Armin looked down at his sisters again, brushing a tiny strand of wet hair from one baby's forehead. "I don't want money, ma'am. I don't want fancy things. I just want them to live. I just want them to smile, to grow up safe. If I have to beg forever, I will. But sometimes I get so tired. Sometimes I think maybe I can't do it alone." His voice cracked, a sob escaping. "But I can't give up. I'm their brother. I have to be both father and mother now." Zara's chest burned. She wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him he didn't have to carry the world alone. But she stayed quiet, listening, letting him pour out the truth that had been trapped inside for so long. For the first time in his young life, Armin felt heard, not dismissed, not ignored, not pitted, but truly heard. When he finally looked up again, his eyes met Zara's. Why did you stop for us?" he asked, his voice full of genuine confusion. Everyone else walked away. "Why not you?" Zara held his gaze, her lips parting but no words coming at first. Why did she stop? She could have driven on like always. She could have stayed safe behind a glass window of her car, untouchable, untouched. But something about that night, that boy, those twins, it had broken her. "Because," she said finally, her voice trembling, "you reminded me of something I lost. And because no child should ever carry such pain alone." Armin's eyes filled with tears again. But this time, he didn't look away. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. And Madame Zara, though she didn't know it yet, was about to make the most important decision of her life. The car rolled up the long driveway of Madame Zara's mansion, its headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. The gates had opened the moment the guards saw her vehicle approaching, and the servants were already lined up at the entrance, umbrellas in hand, ready to escort their mistress inside. But what they saw that night made their eyes widen in disbelief. Madame Zara stepped out first, her silk blouse clinging slightly from the storm, her expensive heels splashing against the polished stone driveway. That alone was unusual. She rarely allowed herself to get wet or appear disheveled. But what truly shocked him was what came next, a shivering street boy barefoot, carrying two fragile infants wrapped in her cashmere shawl, following closely behind her. The whispers started immediately. Who is that boy? Did Madame really bring street children here? This is dangerous. They could be thieves, or worse. The housekeeper, Mrs. Jamila, hurried forward, her face pale with shock. She had been with Zara for years and knew her employer's strict habits. Zara never let strangers into her home, not even distant relatives without an invitation. Her mansion was her fortress, guarded carefully against the chaos of the world outside. And now, she had brought the chaos directly in. "Madam," Jamila whispered urgently, trying to block Zara's path. "Is this wise? These are street children. People will talk. The staff will worry. What if—" Zara cut her off with a single glance, her voice calm but carrying authority that silenced the room. "If people talk about kindness, let them. I do not care." Jamila swallowed her words. The boy looked between them nervously, unsure if they would be thrown back out into the rain. But instead, Zara placed a firm hand on his shoulder and guided him forward. "Prepare warm milk for the babies," she ordered. "Bring dry clothes for the boy. And make sure there is a fire lit in the lounge." The servants scattered, obeying quickly, though their faces were still etched with confusion. No one dared question her again, not when her voice carried that tone, the tone that ended arguments before they began. Inside the mansion, warmth spread immediately. The marble floors reflected the golden light of crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled faintly of roses and expensive with polish. To Armin, it felt like stepping into another world. His bare feet squeaked slightly against the polished floor, and he looked down quickly, afraid he was staining it with mud and rainwater. He had never seen ceilings so high or carpets so soft. The walls were lined with paintings. Chandeliers glistened overhead, and grand staircases curved upward like something out of a storybook. He clutched his sisters tighter, suddenly afraid. They didn't belong here. He didn't belong here. Any moment, he thought, someone would grab him and throw him out. But instead, Zara gently guided him toward the fireplace. The flames roared brightly, filling the vast lounge with a comforting heat. She motioned for him to sit on the thick rug nearby, and he did, hesitantly. A maid soon arrived with a tray, 2 small bottles of warm milk, and a steaming cup of tea. The boy's eyes widened, his lips parting in disbelief. The milk bottles were handed to him, and he carefully helped the twins drink, his small hands shaking from the responsibility. The babies latched onto the bottles eagerly, their tiny gulps echoing in the grand silence of the room. For the first time in weeks, Armin exhaled a deep, trembling breath of relief. His sisters were fed. They would survive another night. Tears pricked his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly, not wanting to seem weak in front of this powerful woman. Zara, however, noticed everything. She saw how carefully he cradled the bottles, how his eyes softened as he watched his sisters drink, how he refused to take even a sip of the tea until they were finished. It tugged at something deep inside her. When the babies finally drifted into peaceful sleep, their bellies full, Armin dared to sip the tea. It burned his tongue slightly, but it was the most comforting thing he had tasted in months. He glanced up at Zara shyly. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered. She nodded, her expression unreadable, but inside, her chest felt heavy. She had expected gratitude, perhaps even relief. What she hadn't expected was how natural it looked. This boy, no older than 10, playing the role of both parent and protector. Hours passed. The mansion grew quiet again, the storm outside easing into a gentle drizzle. Servants retired to their quarters, and the fire crackled softly in the lounge. Zara eventually excused herself, retreating to her grand bedroom on the upper floor. Her room was as magnificent as the rest of the house. Walls painted ivory, curtains of silk, a massive bed covered in golden sheets. She sat at the edge of it, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was flawless, powerful, untouchable. Yet tonight, her eyes were red, her heart unsettled. She had done something extraordinary, something out of character. She had taken strangers into her home. Not just strangers, street children. What would society say if they found out? What would her business partners think? This is not my responsibility. She tried to tell herself. I gave them food, warmth. I did enough. Tomorrow, I can send them to an orphanage. That will be safer, easier. But even as the thought crossed her mind, her stomach twisted. An orphanage. She had asked Armin about it in the car. His voice echoed in her memory. They will separate us. They are all I have. Zara closed her eyes, lying back against the pillows. Sleep would not come. Every time she tried, she saw his face again. The way it looked when he whispered about losing his parents, the way his small hands trembled as he fed his sisters, the way he clutched them even in rest as though the world was waiting to snatch them away. Finally, restless, she rose from bed and padded quietly down the hall. Her footsteps echoed softly against the polished floor as she made her way back toward the lounge. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting a warm but dim light across the room. And there, on the thick rug by the fireplace, was the sight that stopped her heart. Armin had fallen asleep sitting upright, his head slumped forward, exhaustion finally claiming him. But even in sleep, his arms were wrapped tightly around his sisters, who lay nestled against his chest. One tiny baby's hand rested against his cheek, the other tucked under his chin. Their breathing was steady now, peaceful, safe. Zara covered her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. She hadn't cried like this in years, but the sight broke her completely. This wasn't just a boy. This was a warrior, a protector, a brother who had given up his own childhood to save his sisters. He should have been playing in a schoolyard, laughing with friends, sleeping in a warm bed. Instead, he was carrying the weight of the world on his tiny shoulders. And the babies, so innocent, so unaware of the cruel world that had taken their parents and thrown them into the streets. Yet, despite it all, they still had love. They had him. Zara's hands trembled as she knelt down quietly beside them. She gently adjusted the shawl to cover them better, her fingers brushing against Armin's damp hair. He stirred slightly, murmuring something in his sleep, his arms tightening protectively around the babies. In that moment, Zara whispered into the silence, her voice breaking. God, is this the family I've been waiting for? For years, she had prayed, begged even, for children of her own. She had sat in empty nurseries, staring at toys never touched. She had carried the ache of infertility like a wound no one could see. And now, here before her, were 3 children who needed her as much as she needed them. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on her heart. Tomorrow, she could send them away and return to her polished, empty life. Or she could open a door she had long believed forever closed. Her mind battled, but her heart had already chosen. Morning light filtered gently through the tall glass windows of Madame Zara's mansion. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the garden sparkling with dew. Birds chirped softly in the distance, but inside the house, silence reigned. Zara sat at her dining table, a porcelain cup of coffee cradled in her hands. The aroma was rich, the taste perfect, but she hardly noticed. Her thoughts were still tangled in the images from the night before. The boy curled protectively around his sisters, the way his arms never loosened even in sleep. Across from her sat Jamila, the housekeeper, her face drawn with concern. She hesitated before speaking. Madam, what do you intend to do with them? She asked carefully. Zara set the cup down slowly, her gaze drifting toward a lounge where the children still slept by the fireplace. I don't know, she whispered. Jamila leaned closer, her tone urgent. You have a good heart, madam, but you must think carefully. These children, they are not of our world. They come from the streets. People will talk. Your business partners, your friends, they will question you. Zara's lips pressed into a thin line. She had thought of that already. Her name carried weight in society. Every move she made was scrutinized. Bringing in orphans, street children no less, would create a storm of gossip. Some would call her reckless, others naive. But as her eyes shifted back to the lounge, the sight melted her fears away. The boy, Armin, as she had learned, was awake now, sitting upright, gently patting one baby's back while the other dozed in his lap. His eyes were wary, scanning the room as though expecting to be thrown out at any moment. His lips moved silently, murmuring a lullaby in a soft, trembling voice. Her heart clenched. She rose from the table and walked toward him. The sound of her heels on the marble floor made him jolt. He straightened immediately, clutching the twins closer, his body stiff like a soldier ready for battle. Good morning, she said softly. He didn't reply. His eyes darted nervously toward the front door, then back to her, as though bracing himself for bad news. "You don't have to be afraid," Zara continued, kneeling down so that her eyes were level with his. "You're safe here." For a moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet she barely heard it, he whispered, "Are you sent us away today?" The words pierced her like a blade. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. How many times had this child been sent away, rejected, turned aside? How many doors had slammed in his face? His eyes shimmered with unshed tears, though he tried to hide them by looking down. "If you send us, please don't separate us. Please keep us together. I can take care of them. I promise I won't cause trouble." Her throat tightened. She reached out slowly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He flinched at first, then froze, staring at her hand as though it were something foreign. "No," she said firmly, her voice breaking. "I will not send you away. Not today. Not ever." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "W what?" Zara's own tears spilled freely now. She cupped his face gently, ignoring the dirt and the traces of rain still clinging to his skin. "Listen to me, Armin. You are not going back to the streets. You are not going to beg in the rain. You are not going to suffer alone anymore. You and your sisters, you are staying here. With me." The boy's lips parted, trembling. He shook his head slightly, as though the words couldn't possibly be true. But why? We're nothing. We have no one. Why would you?" "Because you are not nothing," she interrupted, her voice fierce now. "You are everything. You are brave, stronger than many grown men I've met. You love your sisters with a heart so big it humbles me. And they—" She glanced at the babies, still sleeping peacefully in his arms. "They deserve a chance at life. You all do, and if God has placed you in my path, then perhaps this is his answer to the prayers I have whispered for years." At that, Armin blinked rapidly, his small chest heaving as though he couldn't contain the storm of emotions inside. His lips quivered, and before he could stop himself, a single sob escaped. He quickly bit his lip, ashamed of the sound. Zara pulled him into her arms. At first he resisted, stiff and uncertain. But then the weight of his exhaustion, his fear, his loneliness poured out of him. He buried his face against her shoulder, clutching his sisters tighter even as he wept. For a long moment, the grand lounge of the mansion echoed with the sound of a boy's muffled sobs and a woman's quiet shushing, her hand stroking his hair. When he finally pulled back, his face was blotchy, his eyes swollen. "Will you really keep us?" he whispered, the words fragile as glass. "Yes," Zara said firmly, wiping his tears with her thumb. "From this moment on, you are not alone. You have a home. You have a family." Jamila, who had been standing in the doorway silently, gasped softly. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears despite her earlier warnings. For all her doubts, she couldn't deny the power of what she was witnessing. Later that day, Zara gathered the staff. They stood in a semicircle in the great hall, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. Zara stood tall before them, the twins now resting in soft cradles beside her, Armin clutching her hand. "These children," she announced, her voice echoing through the hall, "are no longer guests. They are part of this household. From today onward, they are under my protection, my care, and my love. I expect every one of you to treat them with the same respect you give me." The servants exchanged glances, some hesitant, others already nodding. None dared oppose her, not when her voice carried such finality. Armin squeezed her hand tightly, his eyes darting nervously among the crowd. He was still afraid, still unsure if this miracle would last. Zara looked down at him, giving a reassuring smile. "You are mine now," she whispered, "and nothing will take you away." As the day went on, preparations began. The best guest room was transformed into a nursery for the twins. Soft blankets, fresh clothes, bottles, and toys delivered from the finest shops in town. Another room was prepared for Armin, with a proper bed, books, and clothes in his size. Armin wandered through the rooms in awe, touching everything as though it might vanish if he blinked. He had never owned anything, never had a place to call his own. When Zara showed him his bed, he looked at it uncertainly. "Is this really mine?" he asked. "Yes," she said, her eyes brimming with tenderness. Yours forever. That night, after the children were tucked in, Zara stood in the hallway, watching them through the open door. Armin had fallen asleep instantly, exhaustion overcoming him. But even in sleep, his hand rested on the edge of the twins' crib, as though he couldn't let go of them even for a moment. Zara's heart swelled. For years, she had felt an emptiness no wealth could fill. But tonight, as she stood there, she realized the truth. She was no longer alone. God had given her a family in the most unexpected way. And with that realization came a vow, unspoken but fierce. She would protect them, love them, and give them every chance at life, no matter the cost. The following week dawned bright and clear. But for Madame Zara, it carried the weight of a storm far greater than the one she had rescued Armin and the twins from. News travels fast in high society, and whispers even faster. Despite her attempt to keep things quiet, word had leaked. The glamorous, untouchable businesswoman Zara Malik had taken in street children. By the time she arrived at her company's board meeting, the whispers had already become rumors. By evening, rumors had turned into headlines. Millionaire philanthropist or reckless woman? Madame Zara brings beggar boy and infants into her mansion. Will this hurt her business empire? The tabloids spun their stories, some painting her as a saint, others mocking her as foolish. On social media, debates raged, half applauding her kindness, half tearing her down. Inside her mansion, however, another reality unfolded. Armin was beginning to smile again. Slowly, cautiously, but it was there. Each day, he became less like the trembling, rain-soaked boy she had found, and more like the child he should have always been. He read books in the library, ate meals at the table, and even laughed softly when the twins cooed at him. The twins themselves were thriving. Once fragile and weak, they now had round her cheeks brighter eyes and healthy cries. Nurses and maids tended to them under Zara's watchful eye, but Armin never strayed far from their side. His bond with them was unbreakable, and Zara admired it deeply. Yet outside, the judgment grew louder. One evening, Zara attended a gala, a charity event she had promised to support months earlier. It was her first public appearance since the news had spread. She entered the grand hall, wearing a deep emerald gown, her head held high. Cameras flashed, and the room buzzed with murmurs. Her friends, dressed in jewels and silks, approached her with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Zara, darling," one woman purred, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "We heard the most unusual news. Tell us, is it true? Did you really bring home a beggar boy?" Another leaned in, whispering just loud enough for others to hear. "What were you thinking? Such children don't belong in a mansion. It's dangerous. Imagine the scandal." Laughter rippled among them, light but sharp, like knives hidden beneath silk. Zara's jaw tightened. For a moment, she almost walked away. But then she thought of Armin's wide, frightened eyes, his trembling voice when he had asked if she would send them away. She thought of the twins' small hands clutching at him in their sleep, and she straightened her back, her voice steady as steel. "Yes," she said clearly, loud enough for the room to hear. "I brought home a boy and his sisters. They had no one. They were dying in the streets. And I will tell you all this. If that makes me a fool, then I will wear the title proudly." Gasps echoed. Cameras clicked furiously. But Zara didn't falter. Her eyes swept the crowd, meeting every stare. "Do you know what true danger is?" she continued, her voice rising. "It is not giving shelter to children. True danger is a society that turns its back on the weak. True danger is wealth without compassion. And I refuse to be part of that." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then, surprisingly, applause broke out from a far side of the room. A few guests clapped, then more, until half the hall was applauding. The other half remained stiff, their lips thin, but the message was clear. Zara had chosen her path, and she would not be moved. That night, when she returned home, Armin was waiting in the lounge. He had stayed up, pacing nervously. Were they angry with you?" he asked. Zara knelt down, brushing his hair back. "Some were," she admitted. "But do you know what I learned tonight?" He shook his head, eyes wide. She smiled softly. "That I don't care. Let them talk, let them laugh. What matters is you and your sisters. You are my family now, and nothing anyone says will change that. His lips trembled, and then for the first time he smiled fully, a real smile, wide and bright, showing the boy he had been before the world tried to break him. The weeks that followed were not easy. Society tested her resolve at every turn. Journalists camped outside her mansion, hungry for photos. Business rivals tried to use the gossip against her. Even some distant relatives criticized her choice, calling it shameful and irrational. But Zara stood firm. She enrolled Armin in school, despite whispers from other parents. She walked proudly into the building on his first day, holding his hand as though daring anyone to speak against him. Some children pointed, some whispered, but Armin walked taller because she was beside him. The twins, too, grew stronger each day. Doctors praised their progress, and soon their giggles filled the halls of the mansion. Zara would often sit with them in the nursery, her heart swelling as she rocked them to sleep. One evening, months later, she held them both in her arms while Armin sat her side, reading aloud from a storybook. The fire crackled warmly, the room glowing with peace. For the first time in years, Zara felt complete. She looked at Armin and whispered, "Do you know what people are calling us now?" He tilted his head. "What?" "A family." His smile widened, his eyes glistening. "That's all I ever wanted," he whispered back. And in that moment, Zara realized that she, too, had finally found what she had always longed for. Not just children, but love, laughter, and the unshakable bond of family. Let the world talk. Let society judge. She had chosen compassion, and it had given her everything.